The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's The Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
It all started when Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking at the Nixon Presidential Library, said, and by the way, if you look at the story of how the deep state took down Richard Nixon, it's not at all different from the same group of people, the same institutions that tried to do Donald Trump in the first Trump administration. There is a parallel. Then when you combine that with an extraordinarily creative online campaign by two young men at the Nixon Foundation, James Byron, the president and CEO of the foundation, and Chris Barber, their young marketing director, they have started a phenomena online known as Nixon Maxing, in which they have used memes, short videos, and platforms like Instagram, X, and YouTube to introduce an entire new generation of young people to Richard Milhous Nixon. Now, I myself have worked on this particular project for more than a decade, having written 2 books on the 37th president. And now what I see are liberals flipping out because, you see, they can no longer recast the tale of Watergate as a morality play in which the liberals saved America. Those were the happiest day in their lives. They were on a permanent high, for they were, at long last, wreaking a delicious revenge on the man, well, tail gunner Joe McCarthy accepted, they hated more than any other. When Richard Nixon went down, one liberal triumphantly titled a book of the era entitled When the Good Guys Finally Won. Personally, I find that to be a howler. But why did they hate Nixon so? Why do they hate him still? Why are John Dean and Jill Wine-Volner, the former Watergate prosecutor, or Nick Ackerman, the biggest phony of them all, former Watergate prosecutor who pretends to be a unbiased law enforcement official, but is in fact a partisan hater? Why do they so revile him? Born poor, with an older and younger brother dying before they were 18, Nixon's story is a classic Horatio Alger. He excelled at school, worked in his dad's grocery store, served his country honorably in World War II, came home to run for Congress, and was elected along with fellow veteran John F. Kennedy. But unlike his playboy friend, Nixon took Congress seriously. In his first term, he vaulted to national fame by exposing a communist spy, a traitor, an agent of Joe Stalin, inside the Truman-FDR inner circle. That was the golden boy of liberalism, Alger Hiss. In the Truman administration, Americans were angrily demanding answers. 12 million Americans had fought World War II to victory, but Stalin seemed to be the big winner. 10 Christian countries in Eastern Europe had been ceded to the great terrorist by Churchill and FDR at Yalta. The most populous nation on earth, China, for which we had gone to war, had fallen to the murderous madman Mao Zedong. From Indochina to Korea to Czechoslovakia, communism was ascendant. See, what Nixon provided was hard evidence that the suspicions of American patriots were justified. FDR's regime had indeed been honeycombed with Stalin's spies and homegrown red traitors. Nixon had exposed the best and the brightest of the New Dealers, the erudite and urbane Harvard graduate Alger Hiss, as a Soviet dupe. They would never forgive him. In 1948, both parties nominated Nixon for a second term in the House. Not only did Jack Kennedy agree with Nixon, castigating FDR and Secretary of State George Marshall for the loss of China, but Jack Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, sent a check to Nixon's 1950 Senate campaign when he won a massive landslide over Helen Gahagan Douglas after Mrs. Douglas had been carved up by a naive fellow traveler in her Democrat primary. The Pink Lady, they called her, and Nixon's savvy campaign advisor, Murray Schottner, took the voting record of Harlem Congressman and Communist Party member Vito Marcantonio, compared it to that of Helen Gahagan Douglas, and found a huge commonality. He printed it in a pink-colored paper leaflet, and Nixon said she was pink right down to her underwear. The left seethed with resentment, for now Nixon was the most effective anti-communist of his era, the bayonet of the Republican Party in the triumphant 1952 campaign against feckless liberal egghead Adlai Stevenson, and he had captured the vice presidency at 39 years of age. In fact, the rise of Richard Nixon is miraculous. He was released from the Navy in 1945. He was out of work in 1946, but agreed to run for Congress. And just 6 years later, he was the vice presidential candidate on the Republican ticket. That's 4 years in the House, victory in the 1950 Senate race, and then adopted for the ticket in 1952 when Dwight Eisenhower defeated Senator Robert Taft, and party leaders felt that Ike needed a hardline anti-communist and a conservative on the ticket with him. When the liberal New York Post launched a smear to try to drive Nixon off the Eisenhower ticket, accusing him of having a secret slush fund, Nixon's televised counterattack, the famous Checkers speech, not only solidified his position, but he made him the first Republican politician in decades with broad appeal across middle America. In the 1960 campaign, the National Press Corps went into the tank for Kennedy, covering up a lifestyle that would make Bill Clinton look like a Trappist monk. And although there is hard evidence that the 1960 election was stolen in Chicago and Texas, the press was nonetheless delighted by Nixon's defeat. President Dwight Eisenhower and New York Governor Tom Dewey, who had been the 1944 and 1948 Republican candidate for president, both urged Nixon to challenge the 1960 election, but Nixon knew if he did so, he would go down in history as a sore loser, and that he would create a constitutional crisis that the country could not bear and that would show weakness to our international enemies. He chose to suffer his defeat with dignity. In 1962, when he made an ill-fated race for governor of California, the Cuban Missile Crisis blacked out Nixon's surging campaign for governor in the closing days, and he lost, denouncing the media in an angry last press conference. The political establishment exultantly declared him dead. But after the Goldwater rout of 1964, something miraculous happened. Between the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, the deep divisions in the country over the Vietnam War, and with America's cities on fire, the seas parted in such a way that Richard Nixon was able to make the greatest comeback in American political history, save the comeback of Donald Trump in 2024. He first led the Republican Party to a 40-seat gain in the 1966 election 2 years later, in a three-way race in which he had George Wallace running to his right and Vice President Hubert Humphrey running to his left. He eked out a victory to become President of the United States. Then, with both houses of Congress, the federal bureaucracy, big media, and the cultural and academic elites viscerally opposed, Nixon, by 1972, seemed to achieve his greatest coup. It was U.S. victory in Vietnam. He and Spiro Agnew were rewarded with the greatest popular landslide in history, carrying 49 states against another champion of liberalism, George McGovern. But by now, sadly, Richard Nixon had stumbled. Instead of throwing his old friend, John Mitchell, who was my boss and Nixon's law partner, later as Attorney General, to the wolves, when Mitchell's aides got caught filching papers from the Democrat National Committee. Nixon let White House aides attempt to contain the scandal. Like FDR, JFK, and LBJ, he crossed the line. But where they had been protected by Democrat Congresses and their media allies, Congress and the media seized on Watergate and colluded to destroy a president who had defeated them and take the country completely away from them. After 18 months of relentless attack, with his great silent majority shrunk to about 25% of the country, Nixon was forced to resign. To crown the left's victory, Vietnam, they cut off the funds, the same gift of Congress, from the means to defend itself, and it fell to the communists, as did the poor Cambodians. Congress then proceeded to gut the FBI and the CIA, and for that, children, that is the story of Watergate. But now, an entire generation of young people are getting a second look at Richard Milhouse Nixon. It's thanks, I think, largely not only to those opening comments by J.D. Vance, but also because of two extraordinary young men, James Byron, the president and chief executive order of the Nixon Foundation, and Chris Barber, their young marketing directors, who have launched an extraordinary online campaign they call Nixon Maxing. Nixon Maxing is the order of the day and has caused an extraordinary review of Richard Nixon, Watergate, and his presidency. Check it out online. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court has cleared the way for the release of recordings between former President Joe Biden and his ghostwriter, Mark Zwonitzer, tapes that could provide new insight into Biden's memory and his handling of classified information. Now, when Richard Nixon went to court to try to block the release of his tapes, he lost 9-0 in the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not sure why Joe Biden's lawyers thought that he should be treated differently. The Heritage Foundation and the Oversight Project sought the recordings in federal court after special counsel Robert Hur's 2024 report revealed troubling details about his interview with Joe Biden during his investigation into Biden's handling of classified documents. Hur wrote that Joe Biden showed significant memory limitations and appeared unable to recall major dates, including when he served as vice president and when his son, Beau Biden, died. Biden attempted to block the Justice Department from releasing the material, but a divided appeals court rejected that request, ruling that he had not shown the recordings were legally required to remain secret. The court temporarily extended an injunction until August 3rd, allowing time for another appeal. These recordings matter because Hur declined to prosecute Biden over the classified documents found in his home, his garage, and his offices. Hur concluded that a jury might view Biden as a sympathetic elderly man with a poor memory who could struggle to find that he acted willfully. How then, you might ask, was he fit to be president of the United States? While the Biden Justice Department aggressively prosecuted Donald Trump over classified documents and his retention of them, which I concede under the Presidential Records Act was perfectly legal, Biden escaped charges partly because the prosecutors believed his mental condition made conviction unlikely. Of course, at this time, the public was assuredly repeated over and over again that Joe Biden's mental fitness was fine, and they were told that if we did not ignore the truth staring us in the face, we were conspiracy theorists. Vice President Kamala Harris said Joe Biden was sharp as a tack. Americans should not be left in the dark any longer. I think we deserve to hear the evidence for ourselves. Written transcripts, of course, cannot capture hesitation, confusion, tone, or cognitive decline. The government should not protect the political class from embarrassment. Transparency here is essential, especially when questions involve presidential fitness, classified information, and unequal justice. This information could prove crucial in proving the invalidity of Joe Biden's autopen pardons as well. It's time to release the tapes and let the public decide. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. I see Joe Biden has just released his new biography, and I have to wonder, did the autopen write that too? Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
You're back in the Stone Zone. Well, New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani apparently believes that governing America's largest city is insufficient for his ambitions. So while New Yorkers contend with crime, disorder, homelessness, deteriorating public services, crushing taxes, failing schools, and an exodus of business and productive citizens, Mamdani has decided to audition for the role of international prosecutor. Mamdani has announced that his administration is examining whether Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu can be arrested if he travels to New York for the United States General Assembly in September. He has called Netanyahu a war criminal who belongs before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and has consulted the city's legal advisors about what authority, if any, New York possesses to detain him. My good friend Sid Rosenberg was great on this. This is not serious governance. This is ideological theater performed at the expense of New York City's reputation, constitutional order, and a relationship with one of America's most important allies. New York City is not an independent nation. City Hall does not conduct American foreign policy. The New York City Police Department is not Mamdani's personal international law enforcement agency. The mayor does not possess the authority to transform municipal law enforcement officers into agents of a foreign tribunal that the United States doesn't even recognize. The United States is not party to the International Criminal Court. American officials have repeatedly rejected its claimed jurisdictions over American citizens and leaders of country outside its treaty system. Federal law, diplomatic protections, head of state immunity, and America's obligations as host of the United Nations all stand between Mamdani's rhetoric and the dangerous spectacle he appears eager to create. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has previously said the mayor does not have the power to arrest Netanyahu. United States Ambassador to the United Nations Mike Waltz, a good friend of mine, correctly dismissed Mamdani's proposal as political theater. Israeli Ambassador Danny Danon has also condemned the mayor's fixation on Netanyahu while New York faces domestic problems. They recognize that Mamdani either does not understand or doesn't care to admit, and that is the mayor cannot seize control of America's foreign relations merely because he discovered that an anti-Israel grandstanding attracts applause from the radical left.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. When I emerged from my Washington, D.C. hotel last Thursday, I thought I was going to choke on the smoke, thick as pea soup, and learned only then that the smoke came from fires in Canada. Now, President Donald Trump is putting America first again, this time by confronting Canada over trade policies that unfairly target American workers and manufacturers. Trump has ordered a 50% tariff on a wide range of Canadian imports, including wine, dairy products, cement, and even hockey sticks. These duties will take effect 30 days after the proclamation was signed. The administration says Canada has also discriminated against American motor vehicles and auto parts by imposing special tariffs on U.S. products while treating goods from other countries more favorably. President Trump has also authorized under the Tariff Act of 1932 the level the playing field. These tariffs will apply even to covered goods that would normally qualify under the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. However, important imports such as energy, potash, certain fish, critical minerals, and products already subject to separate national security tariffs will be exempted. Under the Trump administration, America has rediscovered that foreign governments cannot be allowed to penalize American companies while enjoying unrestricted access to U.S. markets. The so-called free trade and free market consensus allowed our country to get hollowed out for decades. It sounded great on paper, but we never really had free trade. Under these heretical doctrines, Washington politicians accepted one-sided trade arrangements. They destroyed the manufacturing base that created the middle class, and we lost millions of jobs in the name of global cooperation. We got poorer, and our enemies got richer. President Trump is sending a different message these days. He understands that access to America's consumers is a privilege, not a right. Canada remains an important neighbor and ally, but friendship does not require surrendering America's economic interests to our neighbors. When another country discriminates against U.S. products, the answer should be firm, immediate, and proportional. These tariffs are designed to defend American manufacturing, demand fair treatment, and remind our trading partners that the era of America being taken as a sucker is over. And now the president is threatening additional tariffs because they cannot manage their forests. And because America's in cities as far-flung as Detroit, Washington, D.C., not to mention New York City, are choking on thick smoke from Canadian wildfires. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has made a wise decision, announced that he's going to extend the National Guard mission in Washington, D.C. through January 20th of 2029. For Americans who believe that public safety is the government's primary responsibility, this is basic common sense. I was just in Washington, D.C. I must say it has never seen it cleaner or safer than it is today. The Guard was deployed after years of rising disorder, car theft, robberies, and violence in our nation's capital. Since then, police statistics covering January through mid-July show that homicides are down 38%, robberies are down 18%, motor vehicle thefts are down 53%, property crimes are down 23%, and total crime overall is down 20% compared with the exact same period last year. National Guard leaders also report that troops have helped save more than 235 lives, provided over 530 medical assists, and reunited children with their families 27 times. These are measurable results which show that out-of-control crime in Democrat-run cities is a policy choice, not a consequence of inequity or institutional racism or whatever other nonsense liberals may dream up. Using the National Guard to fight crime in our nation's capital is money well spent, in my opinion. Violent crime, stolen property, collapsing tourism, and unsafe streets carry enormous costs. And when crime is stopped, ordinary people are able to prosper and thrive. More people are willing to go out and patronize local businesses. After all, Washington, D.C. is just not another city. It is the seat of the federal government and a destination for millions of American families who want to celebrate our nation's history. Some local Democrat politicians are complaining that uniformed officers are a bad look or bad optics. I'll tell you what's a truly bad look: allowing the nation's capital to become a dangerous hellscape while corrupt officials make excuses and line their pockets. Safety is not authoritarianism. Abandoning citizens to preventable violence is a failure of leadership. The National Guard is supporting law enforcement, protecting residents, and helping restore order. Until local leaders can guarantee the same results on their own, continuing the National Guard deployment is a no-brainer for the rule of law. Meanwhile, Senator Rand Paul says that newly released federal documents are raising disturbing questions about whether the FBI blocked border officials from questioning a key figure connected to controversial coronavirus research in China. Senator Rand Paul, chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, says that the Customs and Border Protection flagged EcoHealth Alliance President Peter Daszak as an extremely high person of interest before he returned from China through New York's JFK Airport in February of 2021. According to the documents, the Border Patrol officials were prepared to question Daszak and search his electronic devices. Their concerns reportedly included his long-standing relationship with the Wuhan Institute of Virology and his role in overseeing federal grants for coronavirus research, and the agency's belief that substantial funding supported gain-of-function research. But an internal email dated February 4th, 2021, reportedly instructed the Border Patrol not to stop him because the New York FBI office had requested that he be allowed to pass unquestioned. As a result, Senator Paul says the planned questioning and search of Dr. Zalek never happened. Now, I think this should concern every American. Think about it. At the height of the global pandemic, federal officials had an opportunity to examine a man deeply connected to research at the center of the COVID origin debate, and another federal agency allegedly shut that opportunity down. This was a cover-up. The deep state wanted the official story to persist so that they could blame it on President Donald Trump in an attempt to railroad him, which eventually led to the election steal of 2020. The public deserves to know who made that decision, why it was made, whether evidence was lost. For years, so-called experts in Washington, D.C. simply dismissed questions about possible laboratory origin as misinformation or a conspiracy theory. The real scandal is how aggressively federal agencies protected well-connected institutions and individuals from scrutiny. Congress, in my opinion, should subpoena all the officials involved, demand sworn testimony, and uncover who was responsible. Those individuals should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Until the COVID-era criminals are put behind bars, there'll be nothing stopping them from unleashing another virus to cripple society, shut down our economy, and consolidate power for the globalist elites. Now, a Republican congressman is demanding accountability after three major broadcast networks limited live coverage of President Donald Trump's historic July 16th address on election security. Representative Buddy Carter of Georgia has asked the Federal Communications Commission to review whether ABC, NBC, and CBS fulfilled their obligation to serve the public interest. ABC and NBC declined to carry the speech live on their primary television network, while CBS joined late and cut away before the president finished. All three of these networks, of course, carried the live address by President Joe Biden, in which he questioned whether anyone in the country who disagreed with him politically was a dangerous extremist. That they had no problem covering. Congressman Carter says network executives had every right to criticize, analyze, or fact-check Trump, but not to decide that millions of Americans should be prevented from hearing the president directly. See, I think this distinction matters. The public airways belong to the American people, not corporate newsrooms dominated by liberal executives who want to undermine President Trump at every turn. Streaming the address online was no substitute for free, over-the-air television, particularly for older, rural, and lower-income Americans without dependable broadband access. During the speech, President Trump announced the release of intelligence documents that exposed real vulnerabilities involving our voting systems and Communist Chinese access to more than 220 million records of American voters, foreign access to non-citizens on the voting rolls, and election-related investigations. Americans should have been allowed to hear the evidence and decide for themselves, but the fake news decided it would be better for their agenda if the American people were not able to hear President Trump speak. This is obviously bigger than any one speech. When broadcasters suppress a presidential address because they dislike its subject or the messenger, they stop reporting the news and they assume the rule of propagandists and thought controllers. The FCC should punish these networks for their shameful partisan gatekeeping and for shirking their public responsibilities. Free speech means allowing citizens to hear compelling arguments, not allowing powerful media corporations to decide which facts the public is permitted to consider. I hope that the FCC will take this matter seriously. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is putting taxpayers first by freezing more than $1 billion in Medicaid payments to California and Minnesota, while federal officials investigate widespread fraud. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says the money will remain frozen until Governor and would-be President Gavin Newsom and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz provide basic documentation proving claims made in states were in fact legitimate. This is not partisan politics. This is common sense. This is taxpayer money, your money. Federal officials are withholding roughly $867 million from California and more than $200 million from Minnesota after identifying suspicious claims, missing documentation, questionable providers, and payments allegedly connected to people who were already dead. The CMS administrator, Dr. Mehmet Oz, said investigators also found providers who failed background checks, failed site visits, or had previously been flagged by fraud detection systems. In California, hundreds of millions of dollars were tied to rapidly growing in-home support programs and claims involving individuals whose immigration status already didn't satisfy federal requirements for the receipt of the funds. Minnesota recently removed roughly 3,000 providers from its Medicaid system, raising further questions about nearly $200 million in related claims. I guess for too long, Washington looked the other way at this fraud, afraid that cracking down on it would look inhumane or that they would be called racist. Checks went out first, investigations were halted by cowardly bureaucrats, and taxpayers were left holding the bag. Democrats are happy to keep the fraud spigot going to paper over their migrant constituencies and other dregs they rely on for votes. The Trump administration is reversing that failed approach by using data analysis, artificial intelligence, and financial reviews before releasing any more money. Medicaid exists to help vulnerable Americans, not to enrich scammers and illegals. California and Minnesota can receive the funding by proving the claims were lawful. Until then, withholding taxpayer dollars is irresponsible and long overdue. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away, because we'll be back with more on the other side.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
You're back in the Stone Zone. Well, it appears that Big Brother is here. A vast network of automated license plate reading cameras is quietly recording where Americans drive, and outrage is growing as a result. A crowdsourced map identified more than 117,000 so-called flock cameras nationwide, most of which were installed with little or no public awareness or announcement. These devices photograph vehicles, capture license plates, and record the exact time and location of travel. When combined, those records can reveal where someone works, worships, shops, or visits, or who they associate with. Advanced versions of the cameras can capture additional information. Police departments say the cameras help recover stolen vehicles, locate missing people, and capture violent suspects. In Denver, officials credit the technology with arresting hundreds and recovering more than 250 stolen vehicles. We're being sold that an open-air panoptical under our own noses keeps us safe, but our safety is coming at the expense of forfeiting our core rights. We should always be wary whenever the government gains the power to track innocent citizens without probable cause. Unlike speed cameras, these systems record every passing vehicle, even when the driver is not suspected of any crime. Reports have documented improper searches, inaccurate alerts that led to innocent motorists being detained, and outside agencies accessing locally collected data without authorization. Flock Safety, which operates most of the documented cameras, denies that its technology continues mass surveillance, and the group has painted critics as potential extremist threats or conspiracy theorists. It's not out of the realm of possibility that these cameras could be used to profile Flock critics before long. The company says that records are usually deleted after 30 days and searches can be audited. Still, communities across the country are canceling contracts or imposing restrictions over privacy, data sharing, and security concerns. Law enforcement needs effective tools, but public safety cannot become an excuse for building a nationwide database tracking all of America's movements. We don't need more police that receive more resources and better, We need more police that receive more resources and better training. We don't need law enforcement replaced with surveillance tools. People are right for opposing these flock cameras because the last thing our country needs to be is more like China. Meanwhile, the Maine Democrats appear ready to nominate former State Senate President Troy Jackson for the U.S. Senate as their replacement for the disgraced Graham Plattner. But Jackson's record is far from spotless. His history raises serious questions about his temperament, judgment, and political opportunism. More than 24 people describe Jackson as a volatile leader who shouted at colleagues, cursed during meetings, threw a water battle in anger, and intimidated lawmakers who refused to support his agenda. One confrontation reportedly became so heated that the Speaker of the Maine House ordered him out of her office. Troy Jackson's campaign admits there were moments when his frustration got the better of him, but dismisses the evidence as evidence of passion. That excuse would never satisfy the media if this man was a Republican, and he berated female colleagues. Jackson's policy record is just as revealing. He began his career opposing abortion and same-sex marriage. As his ambition grew inside the Democrat Party, he abandoned those positions and moved sharply left. He now supports Medicaid for all, abolishing ICE, and a federal right to abortion. After once receiving perfect ratings from the Maine Right to Life, he later earned perfect scores from Planned Parenthood and helped pass a law allowing abortion at any stage of pregnancy, including late-term abortion. Jackson calls this his personal growth, but voters are more likely to see what it is, rank opportunism. This is a politician changing convictions to match the demands of a far-left political establishment. Maine's Senate race will help determine control of the Congress. Senator Susan Collins is the only Republican senator representing a blue state up in 2026. Maine's Senate race will help determine whether Republicans continue to hold the majority. Democrats are already in a large hole after Plattner's embarrassing implosion. Troy Jackson is not likely to be the answer to their woes. I think Susan Collins' chances to win re-election are looking better than ever. Meanwhile, new national polling shows that there is an uptick in the approval of President Donald Trump and that both parties continue to be held in low regard by the American voters. Those who believe that the 2026 elections are over and the Democrats can declare victory are what we call panicans, far too early to make that decision. The Democrats have nothing to run on other than their hatred for Donald J. Trump, while Donald Trump has a solid record of performance, closing our borders, ending wars, and bringing down the cost of everyday living. Now, I'm not telling you that food prices or gas prices are as low as they will be before October, but they are on their way down, and they will come down further. Anyone throwing in the towel is an amateur or a panican. I'm Roger Stone. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone, and until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?